Hi.
Hi, Chido. Oh, Zenith, you at work? Thank you for your commitment. Hi, Chido. Nice to meet you. Am I saying your name right? Chido.
Yes, you are. That is right.
Okay, Chido. So welcome, Chido. This is us, the Author of Black Book Club. Sometimes we're more, sometimes we're less, but you know what? This is us. So I just want to say welcome. For all of you, you've already read Chido's bio, so I don't usually like to waste time with that. I just like to get straight to the gist. First of all, thank you very much for this book. Short read, short, sweet. So, tell us about you and your inspiration for putting together um, this collection of interconnected stories. Why wasn't it a novel? Why short stories? So,
The short answer to why it wasn't a novel is because I was a PhD student.
oh,
So I was writing these short stories. It was a way of like keeping my hand in until I had time to actually concentrate on a novel. It's like a classic short story collection in some sense, in that it's just a collection of stories that had previously been published. Only three of the stories were brand new to the collection. But I will say one of the things I didn't realize until the story started to come together is that they had kind of the same anxiety going through them. So about half of the stories I'd written them before 2020, but then my dad died. And when I started going back to the stories and reading them, I started seeing that there was this anxiety that one of my parents would die and I wouldn't be able to go home and bury them. And once I recognized that anxiety, um, all the stories that kind of were written after 2020 kept coming back to that question of how do you honor your dead when you're not actually able to physically go, when our culture says physically being there is the most important thing.
thank you. So writing this, would you say putting this um, collection together was therapeutic for you?
I wouldn't say therapeutic, but it did help me understand some of the feelings that I was having in the moment. It did help. So the most useful thing that the collection did for me is that it gave me and my family a way to talk about our grief. Like it gave us like a solid thing to like cohere our thoughts around. So I guess it is therapeutic in a way, but in the sense that it facilitated specific conversations.
Okay. Okay. What I've learned here from reading your collection, and we're just chatting before you joined us. I said there was this other book by Lisa Ndlovu, Drinking from Graveyard Wells. So I was going
Hmm.
to ask,
Hmm.
so you are the second Zimbabwean writer we're having here, and the two collections, there's still something about death because what this collection did for me was it showed me how the passing away of death itself, it doesn't have to be a loved one or not, but loss how loss can cause us to reflect on pockets of our lives.
Hmm.
Sometimes we take for granted, or sometimes we choose not to talk about. That's what this book did for me. Starting from relationships, marriage, love. There is no manual on how to grieve.
Hmm. Hmm.
There's no manual. There's no right or wrong way to grieve. That's what this book has taught me. Just a minute. Are you trying to say something? So if anybody wants to ask a question, please, there's a hand at the bottom. Kanya, are you trying to ask a question? Okay, she's muted. Okay. Please.
Yes.
Are you trying to ask a question?
Um, I I didn't really read the book, so
Okay, so you don't have a question. Okay, thank you.
yeah.
That's my niece. Thank you all. Thank you. Yeah. So I want to start from, okay, no, so talk to us about that. Before we start, I go through the stories. I hope, I don't know if we'll be able to go through all the stories, but yes, talk to us about how loss can cause us to reflect on pockets or different aspects of our lives.
So, I would say that the collection is talking about two specific kinds of loss, right? There's the loss of losing someone through death, but there's also the loss of when you move to the other side of the world, what do you lose by not being physically there and not like being physically embedded in your uh, culture. I think the thing about loss is it forces you to think about things, to see things in a way that you're not able to see them when you're like experiencing them in the moment, right? Like you're now in a outsider position because things have changed and you're now more able to accurately see what it was that was happening before that moment of loss. So I think that's where the reflecting from the pockets of our life comes from. That once things have shifted, once you've had this change in your life where things can never be the same again, you're able to look back at specific moments with a kind of clarity that you wouldn't have otherwise.
Hmm. And do you think that living in the diaspora causes us sometimes to lose attachment to the things we once held important? Yeah, we once thought were important because culture, I come from Nigeria. So when you talk about culture, I know what, I understand. So do you think living in the diaspora causes this? Or it's
You
just
have
Mhm.
You have to work so much harder when you're in diaspora to hold on to culture. One of the things I think a lot about in diaspora is so in our culture, when you're ready to get married, you're supposed to go to your father's sister to like initiate the process. And I always think about what would happen if one of my nieces or nephews came to me and said, Auntie, I'm ready to get married. I have no idea how the process works because there's no like formal lessons for learning these things, right? It's just assumed you'll pick it up by physically showing up to enough family gatherings that you learn how to do the thing. So there's so many things that we learn by experience when it comes to culture. And when you're in the diaspora, you don't get to have that experience. So it can be isolating unless you make a specific effort to keep up with things. Like you have to make so much more you have to figure out new ways to learn your culture because you can't learn it by experience. And I think that's part of the reason why I write. I try to root so many of my stories in like African mythology or African history because it's a way for me to learn things about my culture that I can't do by simply participating.
Hmm. And one thing I've learned about culture, when you are back home and there's proximity, people make you feel that, you know what, this this is set in stone.
Hmm.
Have
Hmm.
to be there for this, you must do this. But it's when you are away, you realize that, oh, it's like, for example, we have a saying in Nigeria that, when you lose a father, a first son presents a cow. And then maybe the in-laws all present, a cow each. But I remember when I lost my grandfather and they were demanding, I think we bought 3 cows, they were demanding a fourth cow. And
Hmm.
I asked my dad, so if you were a poor man, would they have demanded all of these things? And they also said to him, "Oh, you've been absent from your age group meeting, so you have to monetize it." And then he said to me, "It is when a man is poor, you realize that you can use chicken for a burial." There's a way we say it in pidgin English.
Hmm. Hmm.
And
Hmm.
when person not get money, now you they know say they fit take chicken do burial. Yeah. So it's very interesting. Yes, Tosi, I see your hand up.
Right. I just wanted to make a couple of comments, I guess. Thank you, Chido, for being here with us and for the offering that you gave us through your book. I really enjoyed it, getting a peek into Zimbabwean life. And, obviously as an African in the diaspora as well, definitely some commonalities of experience there. Um, my condolences to you for your loss, the loss of your father. It
Thank
explains
you.
it explains the theme, the running themes throughout the book. But I was curious about the title, um, because I mean, who will bury you? For me, it's like once you're dead, do you really care? Does it really matter? Could you really, I mean, you might not even be buried and it really wouldn't make a difference because you wouldn't know because you're dead. So, in terms of your inspiration for that title, yeah, I was just curious about that.
Who Will Bury You is, I think the first time it popped up in the story was when I was writing Chasing Elephants. I think it fell out of the story in edits, but it was something where uh someone was talking to the dad about you only have one daughter, and he was like, well, who's gonna bury you when you only have one daughter? Like a daughter is not enough. A daughter can't bury you because she's gonna go and get married to somebody else. And then once I got to Toronto, and when I'm in Toronto, for some reason, I just have a lot of friends in their 30s who are unmarried and they have their mothers who keep asking them questions. And one of the questions they ask is, who's going to bury you if you never get married, right? Like, as if somehow your father's relatives no longer own you because you're an unmarried single. But where was I going with this question? Once I had that story of who will bury you, and it went out into the world, that question provokes different kinds of anxiety in different kinds of people. For all of like my age mates in Zimbabwe, they like initially immediately understood the context of, oh, it's you're unmarried. How are you gonna get buried if you don't have children who are gonna do the process for you? But with some other people, who will bury you is like a question of, do I have a community around me? Who will bury you is about, am I participating enough in church for the church to show up for me? Like it became a question about the kinds of anxieties that come up when someone else dies. Because when you witness a burial, right, and it's a very large occasion, you ask yourself if there are that many people in your life who would care if you died. If you witness a funeral and there's only like two or three other people, you ask yourself if you're leading the kind of lonely life that would lead to that, or you ask yourself, are my people who I think are going to show up for me always going to show up for me, right? Can't remember which is the story that asked the question. Oh, I think it is Who Will Bury You, where she gets to the end and she's saying, what I'm really asking is who's going to be there at the end. And I think in many ways, each of the stories is asking that question of who's going to be there for me within this context I'm living in. But if my life continues this way, who's going to show up for me in those moments of crisis?
Thank you. Um, that explains that explains a lot. I had another question, which I guess still follows along on the theme of loss, but not necessarily the loss of a loved one or the loss of culture
Mhm.
and adaptation and evolution of identity when you leave home and move to another country. But I think it was the very last story, which really touched on the loss of, I guess, land, way of life
Hmm. Hmm.
during the, I guess, British occupation in Zimbabwe and uh, what the women had to go through in terms of just keeping things together while the men were being conscripted and going off and, you know, being starting to do heinous things. Like you lose you lose recognition of your sons
Hmm.
as they go into the fight for independence. So that was decades, obviously, before your time and before you were born. So again, I was just curious about your inspiration um, for that story. And is it something that is kind of alive in the collective memory in Zimbabwe when it comes to colonization and the struggles for independence and, post-colonization and the issues that still persist as a result of the invasion of the British?
So it wasn't actually that long ago. The war ended a decade, exactly 10 years before I was born. So I have cousins, not just parents, but cousins who lived through the war. We don't talk about the war in Zimbabwe by that I mean we don't talk about personal experiences of the war for varying reasons. I think part of the reason is it was extremely traumatic for a lot of people and they don't want to talk about the trauma, like it's too much. What I'll say about that story is it was inspired by a story that one of my uncles told me. So The story about a young boy having a camera and being suspected of being a sellout and then being burned alive. That's true. That was the story that my uncle told me. And when I wrote the story initially, obviously he can't be the point of view character because he dies and the story needs to like end after he dies, right? So I struggled to find who would be the right narrator for that story. For multiple drafts, it had like the different draft all the time. But in some point there was always this random we that would show up in the story. And I was like, who are these people who keep saying we? And then I realized it was the mothers of the village who were witnessing what happened because when they tell the story of the war in the history books and in like the version our government likes to tell us, the stories of women are always I don't want to say they're ignored. It's just that they're an afterthought. Like they're an asterisk. They'll be like, women also experienced it. They're never like the center of the story. Um, One of the things that happened about moving to Canada is I think about settler colonialism a lot more than I did before. I don't think I had labeled what was happening in Zimbabwe as, or Rhodesia, as settler colonialism until I got here and learned about what that means. And now that I look back at settler colonialism and losing the land and think about how disruptive it was to women in the village. That's kind of what inspires that kind of story to be like, how do we get to these histories that aren't easily accessible? Actually, the story has inspired me to write a novel. Like, that's what my first novel is about. It's about the women's experience of the war, the women who didn't have to leave to join the war, like the war came for them, because there are just so many of their stories which are just like people, the history book will say, oh, the villagers were caught in between the liberation fighters and the state's army. What does that mean to say you're caught in between? Like, what are the kinds of conflicts that happen there? So I can't even remember where this answer began. But yeah, I think about the war a lot because sometimes there are people my age who talk about life was better under settler colonialism than it is now because things are so tough in Zimbabwe. And part of the work I'm trying to do with writing this historical fiction is to correct that narrative, to say, you don't know what life was like under colonialism. That's why you can think it's better.
Right. Thank you so much for that answer. I thought it was really interesting as well how, as many women are taught, and as was illustrated in that story, the women, you carry the grief, but it's buried within you.
Hmm.
You
Hmm.
don't, you're not, there's almost no room to unpack it
Hmm.
because it's just constantly ongoing. So, um, yeah, I definitely related with that as well. Thank you so much.
Thank you for your questions.
Yeah, so I want to put the first two stories together because
Hmm.
it has to do with this I call it a is a less like the she found love, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
Here it's the kind of love, it's the kind of joy that comes from meeting the person who makes your heart sing. So when I read that line, I write books too, and I remember back in the day when I was in uni, I had written a book and it was a love story, and I remember what I had written was the boy who makes my heart smile.
Hmm.
When I saw this here, I just read, I went again, it's the kind of joy that comes from meeting the person who makes your heart sing. When they talk about who will bury you and they talk about marriage here, I noticed that, in the African context, I try not to overgeneralize, but I'm
Hmm.
African, so I can say it. In the African context, when they talk about love, especially for women, they talk about it, marriage, more as a sense of duty.
Hmm.
Yeah, they're talking who will bury you, get married. Oh, your age mate got married. That word age mate, like Nigeria will say everybody's time is different. Or your age mate
Hmm.
got married. Here, let me see. Let me see. My son, she would say, who will bury you if you have no sons? So my question here, her daughters, not kids. She told him to marry another woman who would give him a son. And I'm wondering, but talk to us about love in this context because now she has found love, but with someone of the same gender. So, in all, I don't know the day, I don't know if Africa, the continent, will ever get to that point where people will be comfortable saying to their parents, the person that I'm in love with is the same gender as me. So, talk to us about love and LGBT rights in Zimbabwe. What's the situation? And why is it that because I want to hear your own perspective. My own Nigerian
Mm.
perspective might be different, but I want to hear your own perspective. How important is love when they talk about marriage, producing children, LGBT? What's going on in Zimbabwe? What's the situation?
Well, as you said, when parents are talking to their children about marriage, the concentration is on duty, and the concentration is on you need to produce more children who are going to take care of you, and by extension, take care of us. Um, Love doesn't really come into it. I don't think in any of the conversations I've ever had with my parents about picking a partner, there's ever been a moment where they were like, you must find someone who really loves you. But one of the things I have learned So one of the things I do is I have interviews with older members of my family because I want to have kind of that oral history of my family. And I remember I was having a conversation with my aunt who's like early 80s about her childhood. So she starts telling me about when she met my uncle, and she's like giggling like she's a teenage girl again. And she's clearly talking about what the story says. She found the person who makes her heart sing. And there was a moment where I was like, wait, so these guys who never talk to us about love, they know what love is and they have experienced it and they picked their partners based on it. It's just when they talk to us, they don't know how to talk about love. And one of the things I was trying to do with this story is give parents and children kind of a story that can facilitate specific kinds of conversations. So when it comes to like LGBTQ, well, it's illegal. Homosexuality is technically not illegal, but you can be punishable by law in terms of sodomy. It's punishable by law. Our community, the nation in general, does not condone same-sex love, right? But our culture also says you can't throw away a person, right? Like whatever the person has done, however egregious what they've done seems to you, they're still a person. They're still your person. You can't just throw them away. So what I was trying to do with those stories is think about how does a parent make that bridge of I don't like this, but I also don't want to throw you away. Like, how do they like figure out a way to get to a point where I don't even want to say the word accept. So when you talk about, not you, when we talk about homosexuality in coming out in North America, the way people talk about it, it's black and white. Either your parents fully accept you or they reject you. There's no like in between. And what I was trying to do with the story is think about what if you're a parent who doesn't want to throw away their child, but you also have no idea how to accept it? Like, what does the process look like? And that was what I was trying to think through with this story, is to just think through how could a parent learn to understand what it is that the child is saying to them and learn to find a way to like live with it. Because I don't think this is not a problem we can pray away. This is not a problem we can aggressively say is going to go away. Gay people have always existed. They're not going anywhere. So I just wanted to write some stories that kind of humanize both sides of the story to be like, no, this is not a degenerate who has chosen this lifestyle, and these parents are not just virulently against it. It's just people who are trying to live their lives and find a way to like find some sort of common ground when their child does something that they never expected them to do.
Hmm. Okay. It's like on page 28 where she says here, Tino is all I have left. How can I walk away? Is this all there is for disappointing daughters? Resignation and begrudging acceptance. I think the thing about love for the older generation. And again,
Hmm.
homosexuality has always existed. When people say it's not African, I laugh. Because if you go through, yes, maybe it wasn't in your face.
Hmm.
If you go through artwork, you would see the signs. And like in sociology, they say a practice that doesn't exist or what doesn't exist, there's no word for it. How come we have words in our indigenous languages for it?
Hmm. Hmm.
Have words. But I think the difference is back in the day, it wasn't sexualized. It wasn't overly sexualized. It was quiet. It was what's the word now? We knew everybody knew, but they didn't just talk about it and
Hmm. Hmm.
face. So now it's in your face. So it's like saying, how dare you scream to the world that you are having sex? I think that is because, like, I was listening to a gay activist some years back, and he said, can you guys please stay out of our bedrooms? That why is it that once a person says they belong to the other group, the first thing people think of is their bedroom activities? Can you just accept them as people and take your mind away from what they do in their bedroom? Then I think in the context when we talk about love too,
Hmm.
I think romantic love and expressive love is seen as a luxury. I know that in sociology, my first year we studied romantic love, and I found it very interesting. I'm like, because I want to believe that uh, there was love. It's just that they had different ways of expressing it. The expression then was a man providing for you, and as a woman making the home. But now I think this expectation of flowers, romance, and so on is seen as a Western thing. Because yes, Westernization too has had an influence on how a lot of women and men define love, I think. Yeah, that's what I think about it. Yeah. So I also want to go to, so I want to go to the next story where we talk about grief
Hmm.
and where she was dancing. Where you were, there is, like I said earlier, that there is no manual on the right or wrong way to grieve. No, there's no manual on that. And the recurring question of who will bury you, I think maybe based on where I'm from, I wouldn't have asked who will bury you. The question I would have asked is, where will you be buried?
Hmm.
Yes, because Edo, and I know that other tribes too. There is something about taking the person back home to be buried, not on foreign soil. And I was having that discussion with someone. The person said, but does it really matter where a person is buried? I said, maybe it's me being overly sentimental, but you wouldn't even want to bury someone in the city. They not just take a man, you don't just take a man home. You take him to his father, to his family compound and bury him there. When a woman dies, you take her back to her father's compound. When my grandmom died, when my grandpa died, he was buried in a family compound. So that was they had a compound, but the house my dad built, so he was buried there. And when my grandma died, she was taken back to her family compound to be buried. And I was wondering, why were they not buried side by side? And they said, no, in our culture, you take them back to where they are from. So I guess that is me being sentimental. So I always ask that question, where will you be buried? Like on foreign soil, that is so far from home. But again, the person is gone, is gone. It's not like people, yeah, occasionally people, I know now they have these fancy cemeteries in Nigeria that are well maintained and so on. But when I look at those cemeteries, I'm like, but it's so far from home, right? It's far from home. So yeah, so talk to us about grieving.
So I would like to talk about the burying thing because it's been like a thing in our family about. So in 2010, my uncle died, and they decided to bury him in the city as opposed to send him back to the village. And he was the first person in our entire family to be buried in the city and not back in the village. And it was I don't want to call it seismic, but it sent ripples through the family. And the justification for putting him in the city as opposed to in the village was, well, all his kids are in the diaspora. They're going to arrive in the city because that's where the airport is. You don't want to add another 6 hour drive for them to be able to see where their father is buried. So let's put them in the city where there's easy access. And I feel there was something that was like an individual moment, but that was actually like something that will probably be studied in the future. Like where a family decides that home is now the city and no longer the village. Where people are buried is it's such a complicated thing because it's an emotional thing, right? You want to bury them where they would be happy, but you also want to bury them where you can visit them or where you can maintain their grave. And if there's no one left in the village, why are we still sending them to the village becomes the question. Um, I think the thing about burying is it's one of those moments where you're having to decide whether you're going to do the emotional thing or whether you're going to do the practical thing. And I feel like a lot of the tensions that happen within these stories are because people are in these moments where they're having to decide whether they're going to do the emotional or the practical. So if it wasn't for the nights, this girl is having nightmares because her father died and she couldn't go bury him. But that was because she did the practical thing. If she had flown home, she wouldn't have been able to come back to Canada. She wouldn't have been able to earn money, right? So that was the practical decision she made. I think After Tears is the one that most explicitly talks about it. That one granddaughter is talking about, I was there in Zimbabwe taking care of grandmother. And the other one is like, well, I was sending money. That was the decision that I made. And we don't like to talk about it, but dying is so much about emotions and economics. And that's where a lot of the tensions actually come up in these stories, is that people are motivated by emotional decisions, but they also have to be conscious of economic decisions that are coming into this grieving process. And you were talking about pockets of our life that these stories kind of open up. When you're having those discussions of emotions versus economics, yeah, that's where so many of these stories come from. Because so many times people are in these moments where they have to make a decision, and it's not hard to decide which one of those two you're going to pick.
Yeah, I
I
think
mean, it's not easy to decide.
yeah, I think economics and practicality is beginning to take over. I remember
Hmm.
when I was in high school, my neighbor, who's born, because we've always had this migration where a lot of people from my place go to Italy,
Hmm.
all kinds of things. And his mom was already in her 50s when she went, or maybe in her 40s, but she had grown kids and she passed away. And I remember them saying to us that, oh, she died abroad. And the next thing we expected was that she would be brought back, but they couldn't. I don't think they could afford because at the time they went there, I don't think her kids had their papers, so they couldn't come. So they had to bury her there. And for me, it was shocking. Yeah, it was shocking because I remember hearing her son wailing from the house next door, and I was saying, but how do you bury someone on foreign soil? Yeah. Tosin, I see your hand up. Heather Hemilin, questions from you ladies?
Yes. I just wanted to make a comment on when you talked about After Tears, it brought something to mind in terms of the, I guess, the ripple effect of loss. Sometimes when you lose someone, you don't just lose that person. Sometimes you lose what they're holding together for you. So that story was very interesting to me because what I picked up was that their grandmother, I think, who was the one who raised them, was also kind of the bond that was holding these two seemingly very different sisters together. And the sister who had, I forget their names now, but the one who had gone back to, do the care for her, do the care for the loved one and see to the burial and all that. It seemed to me that once she got back, the relationship she had with her sister had already morphed, had already changed. And with the loss of the grandmother, I feel like there was also going to be a loss of the version of the relationship that she had with her sister prior to that death. So there was definitely going to be more loss for her. And I sympathized with her on that. I also just wanted to ask a question about Paradise. And I think that's the story that highlighted the AIDS crisis in Zimbabwe and the immense loss that would have come from that, cutting across all strata of society. Um, so my question is that still ongoing? And how did the nation cope with that, with so much mass death? I mean, the story focused on the one brother who was essentially the crypt keeper for the family and, in the cemetery. So yeah, just your comments and thoughts on that.
I have one of the things that has, when you send a book out into the world, you never know how people are going to react. I did not expect Paradise to be the story that people ask me the most about. Because in my mind, it was just the story about this weird guy who hangs out in the cemetery. Like, I thought the story was about being homeless and like hanging out at the cemetery. But everyone comes back to the AIDS crisis because that's like why he's alone. AIDS crisis wiped out his family. Um, I think one of the reasons people react that way is since things were got under control, since widespread access to ARVs came along, people don't die of AIDS anymore. And there are ways in which we have memory hold the crisis. People don't talk about it anymore. I was reading this article which talked about how teenagers across the world just use condoms a lot less than millennials did. And I was thinking it's because they did not grow up with the specter of AIDS the way we did. One of my memories of being in primary school is you would be in this class and someone would lose a parent and at the beginning of the term, and at the end of the term, they would lose another parent. They'd maybe like show up for another term, and then they would just never see them again because they've been transferred to a boarding school because their parents have died. And I thought that was normal. I thought people losing their parents when they are 9 or 10 years old was just a thing that people did. Like it was just normal that loads of your classmates would lose their parents. And Paradise is like a reminder of just how many people died. Like my parents were going to a funeral every other week. That was just normal for like the 3, 4 year period. Young people just died. And I think what I appreciate about Paradise is it's allowing us to talk about what that crisis was and how much it shaped what comes after. Because there are so many people who are missing now because there's like a generation where there are a lot fewer of them than the people who come after them because so many of them just died. Um, my mother, she hates me telling this story, but my mother has 35 siblings because my granddad had 5 wives, and like half of them were gone, just gone. Like all of her like age mates, there was no comparison of what are your age mates doing because so many of her age mates just are not there. And it's so much harder because all the people who are supposed to help you in specific moments, there's just not as many of them as there should be. And it's like shaped our culture in ways that we haven't fully reckoned with because we have decided we're just not going to talk about this horrifying period where so many people just died. I'm not sure I answered your question, but yeah, that's what I like about Paradise is that it's allowing us to start talking about the impact of the pandemic because Zimbabwe at one point, I think it had the highest death rate from HIV AIDS in the world. So yeah,
Wow.
Zimbabwe was decimated and we just are not talking about it anymore.
Wow.
Yeah.
I was just looking through my
Okay.
notes. Yeah, I think I put AIDS and I put so young. Yeah, Heather, I see your hand up.
Yeah, because I'm not sure how to use
It's
my
fine.
bird, so I'm using my hand. One of the things as I'm listening to everybody talk, but one of the messages for me that is coming across so clearly is the fact that there seems to be an issue with communication. The one that goes, but the other sister couldn't go because, she sent the money because it seems like she's not able to do both. And I'm wondering if, as a nation, pretty much across the diaspora, if we're able to communicate, our feelings, we're able to communicate, our thoughts, um, if life might be simpler, if it would make sense, because when it's kind of like a leader that's leading, but he's not able to tell his followers where he's going, what his vision is, what he's doing. And, so you have people beginning to kind of openly revolt. I mean, they would probably revolt in any case in some way, shape, or form. But when you're moving and you're moving in silence, you leave an opening for people to think, to feel, to do whatever, because they don't know where they're going. So I'm just wondering if we can communicate better, because a lot of these stories have that theme with regard to the communication. The mother is asking the daughter who will bury you, but she's not talking about why that fear exists in her. And we look at all the other, the stories, and again, it's being motivated by something, so I just wanted to be able to make that comment and see if anybody had a thought or an input with regard to that.
Hmm. I think, Heather, based on what you said here, that story After Tears, where they met for the After Tears celebration, the two siblings, the last page, that is 41,
Mm-hmm.
where she said, I hope I said, if we weren't, I hope I said, if we weren't related, do you think we would be friends?
Yeah, friends, yes.
She looked up at me, still holding her knife. Don't be silly, she said. I didn't know what she meant, and I was too afraid to ask. When I read, how I enjoy books is I always make notes. And I
Okay.
started here writing deep. And then I wrote, many times we are too afraid to voice the truth we already know. You know how you just know?
Yeah, of course.
They are blessed with intuition. And
Mm-hmm.
what I have learned through the years is that you see this thing called intuition? It's
Mm-hmm.
never wrong. It's never wrong. So you already
True.
know. But
Yeah.
I think this thing about communication with us in our culture, I think if we go to, it takes me to the next story, Chasing Elephants.
Mm-hmm.
Where she went on the father-daughter trip with her dad.
Yes.
And
Yes.
she just wanted her father to, I'm very close to my father. I'm very close to my father. I can tell my father anything. I
Mm-hmm.
don't think I've ever hugged my father. And it doesn't mean I love him less or he doesn't love me. I have never said I love you to my father. He's never said I love you to me. And I don't think I care. It doesn't mean he doesn't love me. And if he calls me up one day to say I love you, I'm going to be worried. I'm going to be like, okay, something going on here. So I think that, you see, in terms of communication, I think different cultures communicate in different ways. Because I always go back to my roots, which is sociology. What brings about cultures, way of life, the quest for survival? Like, as Nigerians will say, now who chop belle food, they find problem. It's who has eaten to his satisfaction that goes looking for, oh, you're looking at who will tell you I love you, who will tell. As a woman, okay, let me put it this, as an African woman, traditional wife, you go, hold on. Oh God, my niece is sending me a message. Grandpa has never said I love you. No, he has never. And I don't think I want to hear that. I don't think so. So as an
Mm-hmm.
African woman, when you say to your friends or you say to family members, "Oh, my husband is such a bad man. He's this, he's that." The questions I think that we have these generic questions. Does he beat you? No. Does he pay the rent? Yes. Does he provide feeding money? Yes. Does he pay school fees? Yes. So what are you complaining about?
Oh.
Yeah, what are you complaining about? So I think it's that I think every culture has its way of communication. And I don't think it means any less. I don't think, in terms of communication, maybe sometimes we should learn to voice out. Our own generation, we are more vocal. I am very vocal about things. I like to talk about things. But you notice that in families, when things happen, they tend to sweep things under the carpet to say, just let it go. Look, it's gone. But I like to iron things out because I don't like making assumptions. I want to know that, oh, I saw Chido yesterday. She gave me the side eye. She gave me the side eye because I don't want to assume, maybe she gave me the side eye because of,
Mhm.
So do you think that, yes, there's a clear difference between communication and the expectations. But in terms of chasing elephants, I just put here that on page 54, where she was asking her father, did he ever tell you he loved you? And her father said he didn't need to. And I wrote here, the African way of showing love to kids, we say is, I bought you a Chido, I bought you these shoes, go and try it on if it's your size. Or I bought you this dress, go try it on. And when you try it on, if it fits, oh, mommy, thank you. I pat you on the back. That's it. I don't need to come sing, I love you. So what do you have to say about the communication, the difference in communication? It doesn't mean any less. But what do you have to say about that?
But
So
if
with
you give
chasing
me,
elephant, oh sorry.
Mhm.
With chasing elephants, that's the heart of that story, right? It's a communication problem.
Yes.
One person thinks they're expressing love and the other one is not reading it right. But the thing about, I think one of the things I was trying to get at is there's a generational difference. You can say all you want that Africans express their love in a specific kind of way. But if your kid is growing up watching, I think in an earlier draft, I had her talking about how she used to watch Fresh Prince of Bel-Air and she was looking at the ways that, the dad was treating Ashley and how affectionate he was. We are consuming media that is training us to expect love to look a specific kind of way. And then our parents come and say, that's not how I do it. And that's the end of the conversation. That's part of the problem, is that the parent just says, that's not how I do it. And it ends right there. And the child is just like, well, what does this mean? I think the thing that often happens is when that happens, a lot of children will say, I can't deal with these parents. They're not willing to evolve. They're not willing to make adjustments. But with chasing elephants, the reason she's able to come to a sort of resolution is because she's able to see things from the parent's side as well.
Yeah.
That we always, when a lot of times when these narratives happen, it is the parent who's expected to evolve and meet the child's affection needs. It's not the child who's expected to think through and understand why their parent is the way they are, right? Um, she says she has to expand her own notions of what love means and what love looks like to reach some sort of resolution in terms of dealing with, well, this is how my father is. And you're not going to change old men who've lived the way they are. You're just going to make yourself unhappy. Um, I think that's part of the thing I try to do with all of these stories, with at least the ones that feature parents, to be a little more, I don't even want to say empathetic, but
Forgiving.
to just be willing to see them as humans,
That's right.
right?
Yeah.
Like before they were my father, they
They
were
were,
just a human being navigating the world. And they're still that human. And what does it mean that they are the way they are? What does it mean that they express their love the way they express it now, right? To kind of have that empathy with our parents and um, understand them as individuals, not as just as caricatures of African parents.
yeah, and I like that you said here. I thought of what I considered to be signs of love, hugs, kisses. The words themselves, Shona doesn't have a direct equivalent of I love you. Yeah. In many, and I put here, I said, I love you like in many African languages. Here is, let me see, she said here, he might never have hugged me at the end of the school day, but he was always there. And now he couldn't say that he was going to miss me. But didn't this trip prove that he would? So I think it's because of this, what we are consuming, this social media, the books we
yeah.
are reading, and all of that. I remember as a teenager then, I think it was from watching or reading teenage romance and watching these movies, I got to know, oh, you can keep diaries. You're not a teenager, you can keep diaries. And what was in those diaries? Nonsense. Just nonsense.
Mhm.
That's what was in those diaries. Because, yeah, I mean, as Nigerian kids here, as adults, please How many of you have had your fathers tell you I love you and hug you? Modupe, Tosin, Kanye, okay, maybe Kanye, you are younger, so maybe your dad and grandpa would have said so. Miss
My
H?
father recently started saying it in my adulthood after one of my other siblings
Oh,
brought it to his attention that you never say I love you. And even then, he doesn't quite say
okay.
I love you. It's usually, exiting from a phone call, he'll just say love you.
That's a good one.
But, it's progress. So we'll take
Okay.
it.
Nice. That's nice. I don't know how I would feel if my father said so. I don't know. It's just going to sound very weird. Yes, Kanye?
I mean, I say like I love you to my dad, and he'll be like, I love you too. Sometimes, oh, he'll just like get me something. I'm like, and I'm like, oh, thank you. And then he'll be like, and then I'll say like, love you, and then he'll say, I love you too. I'm not really sure about my grandpa. I
But
don't
your
know.
grandpa always used to praise you when he would call you Ada,
But
Bo.
yeah, he had that like full line. I don't know what any of it means, but it just made me
Yes,
blush.
but all of that was his own way of saying I love you. Because before her grandfather passed, he would always have this what's the word now? Yorubas call it Oriki. Yeah, but he used to have this praises for her. I think she's Yeah, he would always have this praises for her anytime he talks to her, right from when she was little. And when he passed away, I remember she wrote all of that, in memory of him and so on. So yeah, but Heather Hemilin, you from the Caribbean, did your fathers ever say to you that they love you?
No. But again, it brings me back to, because he didn't say it. If we had, let's say, stayed in the Caribbean and we were surrounded by that culture where other people's father didn't say it, but they were there, they provided, etc., would
Mhm.
it have really mattered? It's only because we've come abroad and we see things different, and labels are being put to things, that it's making a difference. Were it not for that, would it have probably made a difference? Probably not.
No. Zenith in the chat says, my dad never said, but I never doubted his love, not even once.
Yeah,
He loved his
exactly.
children. I was shocked when I moved to America and people blamed not hearing that as a root of problems. Can you imagine?
Yeah, yeah,
It doesn't make sense. Miss H?
yeah.
So, my dad did tell me, and my both parents actually, they had me young. So my dad traveled to the States
Mhm.
during maybe when I was younger. So I grew up like that. But even before I remember my mom said she loved me, we had the revolution in Grenada and everybody was scared. And I just remember my mom holding my hands and bringing me so close to her and my brother. For me, that was love. She didn't need to say the words.
Mhm.
I was secure, I felt safe. And I knew that safety net because when she traveled, and left me behind, I sort of felt, okay, I lost something. So I think, again, it's part of colonization. We come to the West, Europe, and throughout studies, I'm not saying it's wrong or right, but I think everything that we had as a culture, Black folks. I mean, look, they take it, they market it differently,
Mhm.
package it differently. There is love languages. It doesn't mean that we didn't have love. It doesn't mean because we don't say that it's not there. If you have half a loaf and you share it with 10 people, that's love. If you're
Mhm.
going to eat last after everybody eats, that's love. So I think we
Mhm.
have to be careful, and studies do that to people. We come here, we further our education, but let's not forget common sense. It was there before books.
Mhm.
And I don't need somebody to tell me how my parents love me or if they did or not. Of course, we learn things and we want to evolve, but we have an obligation to understand through the studies that we achieve how our parents live their lives. Who are they? Because many times we want it to be one way. No, after 25, I think we should be able to survive in a jungle because we have learned enough competencies and skills
Mhm.
to progress through life. And we have to give our parents a chance, an opportunity. They speak differently,
Yeah.
they think differently. They did not get quarter as what they have given us. So even for me, I had a lot of issues with my mom because of the migration and her reaction. But as I gotten older every day, sometimes I look at her and I just laugh. I said, that's the immigration issues because I have to see her story. And her story didn't just happen. And oftentimes it's true what the white man says because we yearn to have something different. And again, it's not what we have, it's what they have. So I think even if we're running away from colonization, we have to be careful what's going on in our heads and how we live our lives because we are repeating it day by day. And earlier, somebody mentioned the burial piece. And I think, yes, economically, many of us cannot afford it. Me, I was irritated as a teenager in Grenada, so I don't care to be buried there or not. So that's my resentment piece. But for my parents who really loved the islands, who really appreciated their parents, even if their parents were beating them or punishing them, there was never a talk or a thought about my mom not liking her mom. And it's amazing, you know. So for them, I mean, if somebody took your land away from you, you endured slavery, of course you want to hold on to it. So maybe for them, the meaning of that burial and to be back where they were born, it's a strong sentiment to say, that's mine, I need it. And I mean, even what, let's say, is happening into America today or Canada, they can just wake up one morning and place us on a boat and say, head back. I don't know where I'll be going. At least for the Africans, they're sure. But we have lost our identity through the Caribbean, so we'll end up somewhere. But based on my color, they will be bringing me back to the African soil. So I think there is something deeper that we need to explore. Why do they want to be buried in their place? I think it's identity. So I think that's my piece for now. It's good discussions. So thank you for that, everybody.
Thank you, Miss H. Modupa, you had your hand up.
Yes, thank you all. I just wanted to say that for me, I lost my dad at a very young age. I lost him at 13 in Nigeria. And, that experience basically helped us as a family. You know how when we started the conversation, we talked about grief and loss and how you start to dive into different pockets. So for us as a family, that grief is what brought about the vocal, I love you, and but prior to my dad passing, my dad was very physical, lots of hugs, lots of pecks, So I did have that. I'm the youngest of 8 girls. So I did get a lot of affection. So let me put it that way. So I didn't get the I love you, but I did have the affection. And even after his loss, I would say, it wasn't so drastic because of the community. So we had lots of uncles and aunties, and, so that helped, with adjusting to the changes and life in general. But I haven't read the book, but I'm definitely going to read it. I've all the contributions have it piqued my interest, so I'm definitely gonna take a look. And yeah.
That's good. I'm happy you said, it's nice you said you're the youngest of 8 girls. I'm the oldest of 7 girls. And I think it would be great. Ask your oldest sister what her experience was. Ask her. And then you had a lot of
Yeah,
uncles and so on. Oh wow. I'm sure you had fantastic family.
I
Yeah.
did. I
Yeah.
still do.
Yeah.
Thank
So let me see. We'll take a question from Lala, then we go back to Chido because look, we need to finish this book. Okay. Lide, I see your hand up. Where is she? Okay, up here.
Oh, oh, hi. Good morning, everyone. Sorry, I'm at work.
Okay.
So, yeah, um, just with Modupe there and Miss Hemelin,
Mhm.
where how at an event or the absence of something, the land or death, how that relates to how that leads to how you can verbalize or vocalize your feelings, right? Because usually those things are there, but something needs to happen, an event, a significant event, a death, the colonizers. So it's like I don't remember my dad ever saying I love you to me until maybe around 30 years ago after I had left home, to move to an entire continent. And that's when all these I love yous came from my siblings and my mom and my dad, because now I was gone, right? So I just wanted to add to that. So it sort of relates to Mudupe's own as well, doesn't it? Am I making it up?
Okay,
Doesn't it?
okay. I mean,
That's what I think.
okay, that's nice. That's
Yeah.
nice. Okay.
So I just wanted to add that yes, I never doubted the love, but I didn't hear it until I wasn't there anymore. And that was the only way they could now express it or show me that I was loved, is to say, "Oh, okay, bye, we love you. Remember the child of whom you are, blah, 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 blah."
Mm,
Thank you.
I've learned
Interesting book.
I've learned through the years that love is an action, is more of an action. For
Mm.
me, love is more of
Yeah.
an action. I don't really care. I don't really think I care what people say these days because people have said so many things and not done any. But you see those ones,
Mm.
the quiet ones, you see actions. Actions
Mhm.
for me tells me everything I need to know. Yeah.
Speaks louder
That's it.
than
Yeah.
words.
I don't need to hear what people just your actions. Yeah. I put two and two, okay, and I know who is who. Okay.
Yeah.
Is anybody else? Okay, let me go to back to Chido. So, the snore monitor. Good. So when I read this story, first of all, right, I was just going, okay, the luxury of having, I think I looked at it as a luxury. Okay, people coming to knock and stuff like. Anyway, me, I can sleep through a storm, so I'm not one of those people who, there are people who tell you, oh, well, turn off the lights. I need to sleep. The light, I can sleep with the full fluorescent on with noise and so on. I sleep well. Uh-huh. But this one, what the story did for me was classism, luxury. And then I saw here where you said something about Zimbabweans they work harder for less. And I
Hmm.
here then let me see. So when she met that guy, first of all, her name, she was the child of a mistress. In Nigeria, there's a name they call those people. It starts with the B word, and I don't want to say it. Huh.
Mhm.
But yes, they will first of all call you that. And a name, from a person's name, sometimes you can tell, you can put two and two together to understand the circumstances of that person's life. My granddad used to give us names like that. If maybe when a grandchild was born, he jumped over a fence, that grandchild's name, be sure it will have something to do with you shall jump higher or you will not jump over that fence. But he was like that because he was one of the elites of his time. Uh-huh. So when I read this name, I'm like, okay, but it's then privilege. When she met this the Ryan, who said because I think he had broken up with his girlfriend, so I did that thing where you spin the globe and go where your finger lands. I just wrote here, I said, privilege and the luxury. And look at this lady who has been looking for, work and so on. And is this thing of safety in the arms of strangers, where she sat and she opened up to him, somebody she'd never met. And then the next morning, then he said, here, she thought of her father, whose parting words had been, when you have to go, you have to go. And then by morning, let me see, at the front desk, inside was a slim sheaf of $100 notes, and Hamu felt silly, forever believing for even a second that he had seen her as something more than the snow monitor. And I remember writing here, she probably romanticized their meeting. Talk to us about that. Why do these things happen?
Why do these things happen? Okay, now I have no answer for that big question.
Like, oh, okay. And then
I
I'm
have
like,
answers
oh,
for this little microcosm. Um, so the thing about the snow monitor is I read an article on the BBC about this job, and I thought to myself, this is such a weird job where you're essentially being asked to erase yourself because you're just supposed to be quiet, and your only job is to make nothing. Like that's your job, is to remove sound from the world. And I just thought about how it would make you feel not seen to have this kind of job. But then you add the context of being a Black person living in South Africa. I always say that I am most conscious of being Black in South Africa, like more than anywhere else in the world. And what does it mean to be this Black person in these spaces that were previously allocated as white spaces, and you're still treated as an outsider, right? So again, she's being erased in that way. And then she's an immigrant and she's a Zimbabwean, and there's been a lot of xenophobia in South Africa directed towards Zimbabweans. So your co-workers were technically the same level as you. Even they are saying you are nothing because you're an immigrant and you're taking away their jobs. And then you meet this person who, for a second, seems to see you because he talks to you and you have this personal interaction. But then he hands over money, which clearly says that the conversation to him was not a conversation. It was you providing a service in his mind. So again, she's not an individual. And it's just a weird situation to be in. And I was just thinking about what does it do to a person to be in this kind of situation where you're constantly being asked to erase yourself?
Yeah, because when I started reading the story, I
Oh,
went, oh, maybe because I'm a hopeless romantic. I was as I was reading it, I was just thinking, okay, so how is this story gonna end? They're gonna run away. Yeah, that's Louisa. I just thought, oh, they're just gonna run away. Now he's really seen her. And then in the morning, I'm like, he leaves money. So was she some form of therapy for him? But
Yeah, like he just thought she was showing up to like, this is what, people in service positions do. If, because right, so you're in the hotel and you're thinking to yourself, customers always, right? What he needed in that moment was comfort. And this woman shows up and provides him with that comfort. She gives him the African experience by like singing this African song. For him, it was service. Like it's another one of those cases of the story comes in the miscommunication. Right? Misunderstanding what exactly is happening. She is reading the moment as one thing, and he is reading it as something else entirely.
she was really vulnerable with him. And then he goes, you've not answered my question. I'm wondering, but she's just told you something here. And I expected him to connect emotionally. And then
Mhm,
he goes sing.
mhm.
Justin, I see your hand up.
right. I also think it's one of the hallmarks of the Black experience when you are in a white space.
Mhm.
And it's something one should be conscious of in terms of the lens through which your humanity or lack thereof. So for me, she was entertainment, a way to pass time, a way to feel better. I feel like colonization is not just in the material coming in and taking the land and resources. It's also extracting from your essence, from your being, from your spirit. And, at least she got paid and compensated for the virtue that that she provided for him. But I think the thing that stood out to me really with that story was what Chido said about how going for extended periods of times of feeling unseen, unperceived, unrecognized, undervalued, really does something to the psyche where, she ended up knocking on that door. Damn the consequences. Because she just wanted to be seen, to be heard, to be acknowledged. And, she ended up doing something that was the complete opposite of what her job should be and being the one to cause the ruckus when, you know, she really could have let that one go. And it's like you are in a precarious situation. Like you could lose your job. You could, there were dire consequences for that action, but it was like something just took over her in that moment that was like, I need to be seen. So yeah, I thought that was interesting.
One thing I will say about that story is it came to me when I was living in Wyoming, was when I had the idea of the story the first time. And I was living in this town where for the first time in my life, I was experiencing like overt racism.
Yeah,
Like
who
I'm
moves to
used
Wyoming?
to
You moved to Wyoming.
It was insane. All I can say, it was a fully paid for
Really
MFA.
makes
That
me
was why
sad.
I moved to Wyoming. But it was just, oh my God, that place. I had people yelling out the N-word at me like I was walking in the Walmart parking lot. I had never had that kind of racism before. I was used to like my Texas version where people just don't want to hang out with you. And I felt so invisible in this place. And that was kind of what I was channeling into that story. That feeling so just people see you, but they decide that they're not going to see you. And that conscious decision that they're making, it takes something away from your soul to be constantly confronted with that.
Oh wow. So you see, so
Wow.
you see the thing. People look at things in different contexts. As soon as you said Wyoming, maybe because I grew up reading books about cowboys, I just thought of horses and cowboys. So you see, Louisa's heart is just yeah. But I'm shocked that in this day and age, people still. I saw a video where a man called a black man the N word, and I was very surprised. And that black man beat, in fact, and nobody intervened. They just left them, And I was,
Mhm.
I said, but why would you in this day and age? Yeah, but it was just very sad because I read it and I just went, when you go out of your way, you go above and beyond, for people to do things. I know that some years ago I told myself, one thing I'm not going to do anymore is go out of my way above and beyond because I had that habit of doing that. And then in the end, you get taken for granted and you're wondering, okay, did that just happen? And then you keep asking, but again, it doesn't, you know what? It doesn't stop you from being kind. Be kind. Be kind, yeah. But this one, yeah, I was disappointed when I got to the end and I'm just like, okay, there you go. Another black person has been used again. Okay, next. Mm-hmm. Yeah. But again, the relationship between her mother, so like in Nigeria, we call the mother a side chick. So how are these children viewed? Because or a baby mama. There was a time when in the 80s, way before that, and into even the 2000s, it was a thing of shame for you to say you had a child, out of wedlock. Or, they label you. But now, especially if the person you had the baby for is well to do, people now, women now have bragging rights. You get? So I don't see why they should carry out this. The people who should be condemned should be the children, because this is an action of two consenting adults, or why anybody should be condemned. Because I noticed that people don't even look at the circumstances. Was this girl raped? Was it? So speak to us about that in Zimbabwe. How are such women viewed? How are such children viewed? Because why would she be given this kind of name? Why?
So, I think when you're talking about how your granddad used to give people these names that mean something,
Mhm.
um, I'm very much trying to mimic that when I like name my characters, because some of the names in our village are shocking until you understand that, oh, no, 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 these were people who were basically subtweeting each other using their children's names, right? So that's why the child has a name. It's got nothing to do with her, or how people view her. It's just this woman is sending a message to the man who impregnated her, and she's decided to use the child, which is unfair to the child, but that is the situation. I will say I agree with you when you talk about these evolving attitudes towards these extramarital affairs, right? In the past, these children used to be called Vana Sango, which means children from the jungle, like they're unacknowledged, it's just out there in the wilderness somewhere. But now, a lot of mistresses are given the title of small house as opposed to, the big house is the main wife, right? So it's almost like they're unofficial second wives. Like it's an sort of
Yeah,
unofficial sort of polygamy that's going on. And those children may never be acknowledged by the big house. They may never come to like big house functions, but you always find there's at least one relative of the fathers who knows exactly who those kids are, and they
exactly.
show up for those kids.
They
Like
always
they're still like the people show up for those kids when the woman is acknowledged as a second wife by the man. But if she is not acknowledged as one, then she has no status, which is kind of what was happening to this woman and her one room. That she wasn't given any specific status, which is why she like takes it out on her children. But because she has this ambition that one day it's going to happen. She continues, to allow this man to come in and out of his life as he wants. Because status, even now, being claimed by a man still means something. It still gives you a specific kind of respect as a woman in our society.
Hmm. Being
Wow.
claimed by a man still gives you some sort of, yeah, I guess maybe that is why most of the time when you see a woman, no matter how successful she is, they always ask you, oh, whose wife is she?
Hmm,
Yeah,
hmm,
they don't care. Like someone said to me, even if you like, you can study, get all the accolades. In the end, it still comes down to whose wife is she?
hmm,
Yeah, whose daughter is she? But you get to a certain age and they go, whose wife is she? And then you go, she's nobody's wife. And you see women, highly accomplished women. And when people are talking about the person, the first question they ask, is she married? Who is she married to? And maybe that determines how you treat her. So if she's
hmm.
married, you accord her some respect and some boundaries. But if she's not, you feel free to walk into her space. A woman's life. Lide, I see
So,
your hand up.
Yeah, I just wanted to add that, the notion of the side chick
Hmm.
is new, okay? In my opinion, it's a new foreign,
They just changed the
possi
name. I think they just changed.
possibly, well, yeah, possibly social media, you know, born, but all these men that you see in Nigeria or elsewhere that have five, six, seven wives,
Mhm.
there were no actual wedding ceremonies. You do realize that. They were just mistresses or whatever was they had going on the side, got pregnant, and now they're automatically a wife. And like Miss Zenith was saying, it doesn't matter how powerful the first wife or the main wife is, there is always somebody from the father's side who knows exactly who that person is, who gives feedbacks. And we know that there's a saying that when a man dies, you he or you don't even know how many children he has until he dies,
So he dies.
because
Yeah.
it's when they start showing up. So none of those people are B words, and none of them are side chicks. This is it just depends on how much audacity this man has to say, hey, this is my other wife, or yeah, you can move in. The one at home can't say nothing to you. How much money he has while we're at it, because power is related to how much money people have in this circumstance, right?
Mm. Okay. Interesting. All right. So I want to go to Finding Mermaids. So the other book we read last year also touched on these mermaids, people drowning, um, people needing to the construction workers needing to appease the water so they could construct in peace. We've had that thing in Benin. When I was in high school, there was this river then, Ovia, where people were always having accidents, and all the accidents were ghastly. People would always die. You see limbs all over. And somebody was saying that the reason why it was like that was because the engineers didn't appease the water, that the old bridge, people would have accidents on the old bridge and there will be no casualties. But that this one, a lot of drivers that were asked, because the road, I mean, it was good. I've driven over it. And a lot of people claim that the drivers that were asked said when they get to the bridge, they see a woman sitting there. And that in that confusion, they veer off, veer into. So what is it about these mermaids? Because you are the second author I've read who has talked about mermaids. What is it about the water there in Zimbabwe and mermaids? What is it about it? Is it some sort of territorial battle? Because Christianity, I always say Christianity demonizes what it doesn't understand. All of us I mean, we grew up with Ariel, right? We loved Ariel. But this one, you call them Njuzu.
Hmm, hmm.
Ah, and
They're nothing like Ariel, I'll tell you that much. My mother used to scare us with stories about Juzu, right? Like, if you were being naughty at night, she'd be like, if you keep talking, the Jews are gonna come and take you. It was this kind of, I don't know. At some point, I thought it was a way of warning children not to go near water, like it was a way to like limit drowning. It's I think with Finding Mermaids, it was the story seems to suggest that it's a way of processing grief. But the story persists so much. I don't know. I think water in general, at least in Shona culture, we're always at least respectful of water bodies. And I think it's about the unknown. You don't know what's in there. So you tend to approach these kinds of places with respect because you don't know what's in there. You don't know how easily you could disrespect the spirits without intending because you don't know what it is. And I think the Jews who come into that to be like, well, there might be these creatures who might come and take you away. But they're also supposed to be, sites of knowledge of this is how some traditional healers said to find their powers. I don't, it's one of those things where we cannot possibly know what's happening in the water. So we come up with stories and they could be real, they could be fake, but how do we prove it? Because none of us are going into that water, are we?
I think one of the things that makes life and existence interesting are the mysteries we don't understand. I'm
Mhm,
a history and cryptozoology junkie. I like anything the unknown. You would find Louisa watching it. The aliens, mysterious sightings, all those kind of things. I always feel that, and I feel sometimes, when you try to demystify a lot of things, because the
mhm,
simple question here could have been, why not everyone, why won't people learn to swim and so on? But if these things have been happening, I believe that life goes way beyond the physical. That's what I believe. Even though some people will tell you, nah, if I can't see it, I can't believe it. Nah, I
I
believe
agree.
that yes, there is there is a lot. There is a lot. Because when I saw this, but I'm now wondering, why not just spirits? Why mermaids? Is it because what everything that is happening in the water? And because there's this saying that we haven't even explored, maybe, I don't know, maybe we've just explored 1% of water bodies. There is a lot in there. I'm one of the people still trying to find if Loch Ness exists, where is Nessie, and all those, all those mysterious sightings. Because the water body is endless. Let me put it that
mhm.
way. It's endless. So I believe that there are mysteries there. But my thing here is I feel that that's what makes life interesting. We must not have the answer to everything. Sometimes I feel that we should sometimes learn to leave things as they are. That's the beauty of life. What do you guys think? Do you want to have an explanation for everything? When we thought thunder was the gods growling, it must have been fun back then. But now they tell you it's electrolytes and different things doing that. I would have loved it if, I still believe that rain were the gods crying or the gods trying to cool us off, all those kind of things. It snowed today and somebody was saying, but it's spring. And I remember saying to the person, maybe the gods just decided, to that pot of snow to turn it over and just empty what is left down. I feel that's what makes life exciting. But what do you guys think about this mermaid story?
If I may say, for us in the island, we have ocean. And when Chido talks about the mermaids, we were not told that, but we were told like the seawater has no branch. So it was a safety issue for many parents. So in the islands, many ladies cannot swim, but the men, they're able to because they were running away or going to their friends and making their way to the ocean to swim. But it was costly at times because some lost their lives. So it was a protection. In North America, we have the lifeguards, we have the swimming pool that is more contained. But as girls, there was certain restrictions already on us. So even when we're on the beach with families, which we are allowed to go, somebody may teach us to swim, like your dad, again, showing love. Most often it's the male figure, but we were told don't turn our backs to the ocean. Why? Because it can have a sudden change. And again, it can be risky. So we know there are many things there, but I think for people specifically in Grenada, and as Chido was speaking, I remember being told those things and being very angry as a teenager, like, why can't I go with my friends? But every family or most household had an incident with drowning. So parents become very, very cautious. Of course, it's cost us because Louisa, you mentioned, why don't we learn to swim? But
Yeah,
where
I still
and
can't swim.
how?
I'm scared of the water.
Yeah, exactly. And even here, I try to learn, but it's still a challenge because they've instilled so much fear
Yes.
with us over time. And if we don't have exposure, then it can really impact us. So I don't know why not mermaids or why mermaids, but I know we have specific rules that is embedded, ingrained in the culture that we know we have to be very cautious with the ocean.
Hmm. Okay. So, does anybody have any other questions to ask? Because I want to, let me see, what's the time? We have 4 more minutes. Okay. So I want to wrap it up, right? I want to put together, let me see, Captive River, okay, has to do with water. So I want to put these two stories together.
Louisa, Heather has a question. Sorry.
I don't, okay, Heather, yes, please.
No, sorry, I just wanted to make a comment about the fact that, and I think you had alluded to it before, we really have to be careful about the narrative that we have been fed throughout our lives, because sometimes narratives are given to us for the benefit of others as opposed to for the benefit of ourselves, you know. And the other thing I wanted to be able to say is that many mysteries can be solved, not everything, but not many people are willing to pull the curtain and look behind it.
Okay. All right, thank you. So I want to put these two stories together. Kariba Heights and The Last of the Boys. I know you had touched on The Last of the Boys, with that, but that boy who carried a camera around because of the war. But this story, Kariba Heights, it got me, and what I saw in this story was unfulfillment, women's relationships, prostitution. This woman marrying a man she didn't know at all. I mean, he wasn't a bad man, but there was just a lot of unfulfillment there, and how she had to resort to her maid getting her something from the women so she wouldn't have kids. I thought that if she was married, like some people would say, even if you are married and you don't love the man, you are not happy with him, have children and focus on your children. But this one, she didn't want to have anything. And she was thinking of an escape. And what was it about the dam breaking? What was it about that? I heard that, from what you were saying here, people who fell were buried in that. I've heard that story before. That sometimes when you build dams and people fall, you bury. Like when they say people who drown are buried by the water. I don't know why, but they always say they are buried by the water. So talk to us. What was the significance of this dam breaking? People being buried in it, and then unfulfilled relationships, because everybody left but the man stayed back, and then the lady was left without a job.
The thing is, so when Kariba Heights came to me as I was writing a different story. I was working on the Captive River, which obviously talks about Kariba Dam years after they've completed the dam. And as I was reading this book about the history of the building of the dam, it was just the kind of circumstance that's just a gold mine for a writer, in that it brings a lot of different people with a lot of different kind of goals in their lives together and forces them to stay in this place where they're not able to easily escape. So you have a lot of clash of interests. And going back to grief, the reason this woman is in this situation is because her father died and she needed someone to protect her. So she rushes into this marriage. But once she's like out of the cloud of grief and understands what she's done, she's now trying to find a way out, which I think is not an uncommon story. It's just that in the context she was living in, it's a lot harder for her to get herself out of that situation. The dam was changed a lot of things for a lot of different people. One of the reasons why there were so many Italians who were building the dam was because the Italians were already in Zimbabwe. They were former prisoners of war because during World War II, they used to send Italian prisoners of war to Rhodesia for some reason. And one of the ways they would earn their freedom was by building things. So you already have kind of this colonial global thing that's happening because of the Italians' presence. It's the first project the World Bank funded. So it's kind of like globalization is this is the first side of it. But it's also happening within the context of this is where the Rhodesians are starting to move away from the British. They're starting to have arguments with the British about we want to be our own nation that's separate from the British Empire. And so that all this global stuff that's happening, and women are just dealing with the effects. Like they're just dealing with the undercurrent. And a lot of people are making decisions for them. And I'm promise I'm going to answer your question. Let me go to the side for a second, which is one of the things I was very uncomfortable with Kariba Heights is I was writing about white women. And anytime I'm writing about white people, it's not that I don't think we should write, Black people should write about white people. It's just I always feel like anytime I'm writing about white people, it's time I'm not writing about Black people. And there are just still so many stories to write about Black women. Why am I writing the story about white women? And the reason I needed to talk about the white women was to talk about that was the only way I could give this Black woman um access to this context, right? Because the only way the Black women could be present within this context is as prostitutes or as domestic help. They couldn't just arrive as a person who just was curious or like helping on the project, right? They had to come to work, as opposed to the white women who all had to come as spouses. Like that's their only purpose. And Kariba Heights, at the heart of what I'm trying to get at, is this kind of how white women and Black women were living in this context at the same time, but living completely different lives. Like the dam wall for the white women becomes a metaphor, right? It becomes this metaphor of I'm being hemmed in. It becomes a metaphor of I can't breathe. Whereas for the Black woman, the dam wall is how she's able to feed herself because it is economics is what the dam wall is to her. So when it's falling down, this white woman is thinking, okay, I can finally escape. And this Black woman is thinking, well, what am I going to do when I no longer have a job? And that's why the wall was important for me, is it just represents so many different interests for so many different people. And that's what settler colonialism was, is people all looking at the same thing, all wanting a piece of it, and some people using dominance to take it away from other people for self-interest, not realizing that, not caring that this is affecting their livelihood and affecting the way that they can live their lives. It's just, it becomes a representation of all the things that were wrong with 1950s Rhodesia in that moment.
Wow. Well, I think does anybody have any questions? Because I want to wrap up, but I want to wrap up with this few things and also ask questions. So, in the throughout the book, there is the subtle conflict, often loud conflict between intergenerational relationships. And what one thing I've realized also, having read a second collection of short stories by a Zimbabwean author, is that interracial friendships are never real. Many times we the Black ones think that, oh, I've made a connection here. But on the other side, nah, they just use you. That's what I have seen in these relationships. Yeah, it's more okay because this woman was already getting attached to this lady because somehow in her head, I want to believe she considered her as her friend because at the point she said I don't want you to go, but that one didn't care. Yeah, I see that. And another strong question is because majority of the main characters in this book, the protagonists, are mainly women. So if the protagonist or the main characters were men, do you think the stories would have taken a different course? Do you think it would have had a different ending? Like, for example, if we look at the snow monitor, let's say this was a Black man doing this job, and it was a white woman who was crying all through the night, and he had kept knocking persistently on her door. Do you think that the stories would have ended? Because I know I read somewhere where they said a woman said that during the time of racism in America, they said a white woman's tears is equals to a Black man's death or life sentence. So do you think that the stories would have taken a different course if the protagonists or the focus were men? Even in the last story where you were talking about the mothers, let's say we're talking about the father's experience. Do you think the stories would have had a different ending? In the beginning, when you spoke about Tino, if Tino was a boy who had fallen in love with another boy, do you think people will still be asking who will bury you? Yeah, because gender, I'm looking at the gender dynamics here.
Mm, mm, mm.
Think the
I had
story
a
different course.
Yeah, I had a conversation on a podcast with a male interviewer, right? And he was talking about who will bury you and how his grandmother had started asking him when is he going to bring a wife back. And I had never thought that men get that kind of pressure to be like you're at an age where you need to get married, right? But as much as they get that pressure, it's always going to end up differently. It's going to look different, right? Like all his grandmother says is, when are you going to get married? When are you going to get married? But when you're a woman and you're in your 30s, so here's one thing that I've discovered in going home as an unmarried 30 woman in her 30s. In my 20s, people used to say you should be more like Chido. Look at her going to school, look at her success. Now I've become a cautionary tale. People are like, if you do too much school, you're going to end up like Chido, who's in her 30s and unmarried. There's this unique pressures that are on Black women that are often undertold. So if we go to Kariba Heights, and the thing about Kariba Heights is honestly, the domestic was more likely to be male than female, like in actual history. Like I had to make a gender switch because I wanted to talk about Black women, because Black women in Zimbabwe were considered legal minors their entire lives until 1982, maybe. So she couldn't have been this single woman living out there working in her life because that was not the space that she was given. And I know this question is supposed to talk about how the male,
How do you
how
think the story
stories would
would have
be
ended? Yeah,
different.
the course of this
But
would have been different.
to be quite honest with you, I don't think much about the men because for me, it's just shocking how many of these stories just do not include what women were doing. Like every time you read a history book about Kariba, all I think to myself is, but what were women doing when the men were creating all this history? Like what were the women doing? Um, I'm sure there are interesting dynamics that would change if we shifted to the men, but I also feel like a lot of them have already been explored. Maybe not in this specific context, but they have been explored by other people and studied all over the place. Whereas Black women, and specifically Zimbabwean poor Black women who are not living in cities, their stories are just not highlighted enough historically, which is actually why I've shifted to historical fiction because I keep going into the archives and I keep not seeing Black women. And I'm like, where are they? And it takes so much work. With a story like Kariba Heights, it takes me so much more work to write the maid story in
Mm.
comparison to writing the white woman's story because there's so much information available about the white woman. But the Black woman, I have to dig deep. I have to figure out in what corners these women are hiding to find their stories because they're just not told. So, yes, the Black men's stories are important, but my current focus now is Black women because there's just not enough stories. Because now people will say Black women never contributed anything when really it's just that their stories were just not considered important enough to record.
So it's safe to say Black women's experiences were hidden in plain sight. It was just,
Hidden in plain sight.
yeah,
Yep.
just there. But I think people just take it for granted. It's like how you take it for granted that you and your husband go out, you both go to work, you come home at the same time. He goes to the living room, takes off his shoes and picks up the remote, and you on autopilot go to the kitchen to prepare a meal for both of you.
And when you were at work, you were already thinking about the work that you are going to
But
do when you get home. Like you're
yeah,
constantly doing the two jobs. You never get to switch
yeah,
one off.
yeah. Like someone said to me, "Oh, as a woman, one thing you should realize as an African woman is you should have many hands. So you are the wife, the mother, the friend, the lover, the housekeeper, the cleaner, the driver, the everything." And then in the end, all you hear is, well, you are a woman. Other women have done more than you.
Mm-hmm.
You're not the first to do this.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Well, Chido, I would like, what are you working on now? What are you working on now?
At the moment, I am attempting
Mhm.
very hard to finish my first novel.
Oh,
It was inspired by The Last of the Boys, but it's basically about three teenage girls and how what their experience of the war looked like as, their village was affected by the war. So that's like the main big project. But short story wise, I've decided if you'd read the acknowledgement, you'd know that The Captive River was published under the name C.T. Muchemwa as opposed to Chido Muchemwa. Not the Captive, yeah, The Captive River, because it's speculative fiction, it's fantasy.
okay.
So short fiction wise, I'm concentrating on being C.T. Muchemwa for now. So I'm publishing a lot of stories based on like Zimbabwean mythology and that kind of stuff. I had a story last month come out in Fire. I have one coming out this month. No, April, in the Deadlands, which is about ancestral spirits. So I expect to publish a lot of stories in this coming year as CT Muchemwa. And hopefully at some point this year, you'll get a notification that Chido Muchemwa has sold her first novel.
Okay, I mean, that's fantastic. And what is one thing you are happy that people who have read your book have come to know about Zimbabwe?
One thing I'm happy that people have come to know. Uh, I actually can't. You know what? I'm gonna go back to Paradise. I like Paradise. Paradise, for one thing, has highlighted the AIDS pandemic, which is a conversation that needs to happen. But I also like that Paradise is set in a small town. Um, Stories that get noticed in Zimbabwean stories, they tend to be either about the big cities that are in Bulawayo or about the rural areas. So I'm just happy that there's this story about this little town that I really love that people are like getting access to.
Okay. I see Zenith had said something about let me see. In Zambia too, my parents' degeneration is half gone, including both my parents. I, I too am shocked it was normal. I was shocked to find out how rare it was to be an orphan here in America. Oh, wow. Those of us in West Africa, well, what we know mainly about South and East Africa is what we see in the movies.
Mhm.
Yeah, it's what we see in the movies. And now that we have this book club, we are doing more to read more. And at least I'm happy that we had you here to ask questions and to share experiences. Because one thing I realized when we started the book club is how little the blacks in the Caribbean knew about us as Africans and how little we as Africans knew about the the Caribbeans. And I've come to realize, and one thing I'm grateful for in this about this book club is that I've come to understand and respect and appreciate the fact that the black experience is different for everybody.
Mhm.
We
Mhm.
as Africans, I realized that for the longest time, we just come into it with authority. Yeah, this is where I'm from, this is that. But I've learned now to be more sensitive to the experiences of other black people, to realize that some topics like as Nigerians, we are naturally sarcastic. So yes, we have a caustic sense of humor, and it's not for us. It doesn't mean anything. But I've come to realize that it's not like that for everybody because people have intergenerational traumas, and all of that. So it's just very interesting that I've come to realize that the black experience is different for everybody. The war you spoke about, we heard about the Biafran War, maybe my parents' time. Yeah, we've had intertribal clashes and all of that, but not really experienced it like that. Yeah, there was the AIDS pandemic, but I don't know. We were protected from it. We heard about it in the news, we read about it, but I didn't have neighbors dying and all of that. No, I didn't. No, no, we didn't have that. But yeah, but before we go, please, if you have your copy, we need to take our selfie. If you have your copy, please, we need to take, for those who don't have, it's fine. Thank you for your presence. Lide, do you have your book? Okay. Hold it up.
1 minute, please.
Chido,
Just
we
let
can't
me find
see
some
your
lighting.
blood. Put it in front of you like this. Let's see. Better like that. No, no, no. It's not. We can't see. I'm only seeing this month.
Oh, I need to like turn off my blare is what I need to do.
Let me see. Okay.
I'm
No,
ordering mine
you're
on
looking for
Amazon. So I put
okay.
it on.
With Dream Count, wow.
Now, Chido, yours is still not clear, but you know what? We'll have to make do because yours is blood.
Yeah, it's because of the blur, and I can't figure out how I turn off the blur while I'm in a
While you're
Zoom.
in the Zoom,
Oh, the top three
the top,
dots on your
the top three
picture, on your
dots
video. They're like three dots when you hover over your.
in the box there, in the box. Those,
Oh,
yeah,
okay, okay.
yeah.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
Uh-huh.
I was
Oh,
never gonna figure that out on my own.
so everybody, big smile. Okay. So I want to say thank you, Chido. It's been fun. I just picked up my phone yesterday night and I called her. And then I went, oh, I'm in Canada, I should have scheduled a call. But sorry, the Nigerian in me, I just decided just to call you. And she was very understanding. So I just want to say, Chido, thank you for this conversation. We will still be talking. I'll still be stalking you, for your next books and your next, whatever you're working on next. So thank you very much for spending Saturday with giving us 2 hours of your time. Thank you.
Thank you guys for this wonderful conversation.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye, everybody. Thank you.